Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu tav v'tzivanu la'asok v'divrei Torah. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. Opening question. How do you talk someone down from their anger? Yes, Janet.
You talk quietly. You give them a chance to air their grievances. You don't try to talk them out of their grievances. You pay attention to what their concerns are. And that sometimes diffuses people.
That's a wonderful, we should put that on a wallet-sized card. The steps to talking down, right? Very good. Thank you. Does anyone else want to share their thoughts on how to navigate that, talk someone down from their anger? Yes, Claudia.
This is neuropsychology, which I'm really into as a psychotherapist. When somebody else is in upregulation, anger, the listener is wired for survival reasons to go into anger as well. So if you really want to get the other person down, you've got to not upregulate yourself. So the first job actually is to manage your own reaction, arousal level to the other person, because when it's perceived as a threat situation, any intense emotion, it doesn't have to be anger from the other person, will land with the listener as aggression. It's binary, it's black or white for survival reasons. The nuance goes away. So in order to be able to listen, to do the reflective listening, you've got to manage yourself. Oh, it's hard.
Oh, that is wonderful. It's so insightful. And just as I hear it, it's so true. Thank you, Claudia. Anyone else? Yes, Annette.
Speak very softly. Less is more. Don't talk a lot. And say things like, I understand.
Thank you. Also, of just a sense of giving space to the person in all these different ways. So true. Thank you. Susanna.
Well, I think in the case where the anger arises from serious or legitimate grievances, the acknowledgement is really critical. And in a range of ways, sometimes one-on-one in private, but in a larger scale of major grievances, public acknowledgement is really important.
Thank you. That sense of giving the victim, the person who's been provoked, their due, and maybe how hard that can be to do for the listener, and also in the midst of anger to get to the heart of what's leading to the anger. Thank you. Also very insightful. Thank you. Anyone else want to speak to it? Okay. Well, that is definitely a great collection of wisdom with regard to dealing with anger. So we're going to hop into the parsha. I would like at the outset, there were a couple of people who've written very insightfully on the parsha, Nachama Leibovitz and Rabbi David Foreman, and a good part of this lesson is taken from some of their teachings. Overview of the parsha. So we've just made our way through the 8 parshiot of the Shovavim Tat, the first 8 parshas of the book of Exodus that occurred during this time of winter. The Israelites have been given the Torah on Har Sinai. There have been some more specific laws that they received that we went through last month in Mishpatim. The donations have been solicited for the building of the Mishkan, and the design of some elements of the Mishkan have been revealed. Tisa opens with a census that's to be accomplished by the donation of a half shekel towards the upkeep of the Ohel Moed and the Mishkan. And it opens kind of in the middle of a chapter. Then a description of the copper laver that Aaron and his sons had to wash their hands and feet with before services. The formula for the anointing oil is talked about, and this anointing oil is supposed to be used only for anointing and for the Mishkan service and not for any other purpose. We are introduced to Bezalel and his assistant Aholiav, the designers and implementers of the Mishkan. And then, I don't know about you, but I'm always delighted when I see some of our prayers in the parsha and what we're going to say today. I think the bulletin alluded to this. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et Shabbat. There it is sitting, shimmering in the portion. It's really lovely. And then the parsha flips back in time to the aftermath of the giving of the tablets. So it's really kind of confusing. Again, this chronology that we talked a little bit about in context of Mishpatim. So Moses goes up to Har Sinai, and he stays there 40 days, 40 nights with God. He receives the 2 tablets, and then all of a sudden, God says, "You have to go down. The people are kind of out of control." So Moshe goes down the mountain and he sees the people praying to this golden calf, and in his anger, he smashes the tablets at the foot of the mountain. He grinds the golden calf into dust and makes Israelites drink it, and exhorts the Levites to take their swords and start slaughtering people. And 3,000 people die. And Moshe goes back to God to beg for forgiveness and says, "Forgive them or blot me out of your book." And God says, "Well, I'm not going to blot you out of the book. You haven't sinned," and ultimately does forgive the people. Moshe asks to see God's glory and presence, and God says, "You can't see my face, but hide behind this rock. I'll shelter you with my hand." God passes by, and that's as close as Moshe gets to that. God asks Moshe to carve 2 tablets, goes up for another 40 days and nights. Those are inscribed with the flaming letters of the Torah. And Moshe comes back down, and when Aaron sees him, his face is radiant. The Hebrew is Keren Or, a horn of light. And from this man's mistranslation comes the symbolism of Michelangelo's great statue and all of those non-Jews who want to feel the top of your head. So this is a parsha that's chock full of history, symbolism, drama, liturgical time. So we've just celebrated Purim. Hopefully you made a sufficient fool of yourself and got drunk as you're supposed to. The Torah readings are a bit out of sync. And even though Pesach is coming up in 4 weeks, we read about the Exodus obviously earlier, but the echoes of the Exodus obviously reverberate through the narrative. I see a note here in the chat. What is the mistranslation to? I think it's horns of light, Karen Orr. And I don't know if it happens via the Greek translation or, I have to go back and figure out whether, where that comes in, but someone blew it. Yes, you're welcome. And we have 4 Shabbatot leading up to Pesach. I think this week is the 3rd one, the Shabbat Parah, the Sabbath of the cow, where we read about the mysterious Parah Adumah, the red heifer. So on to the Parsha. Let's go to the beginning of Tisa, Exodus 30:11. And I'd like to read 11 through 16. And if anyone can, do you have it in your Chumash?
Yeah.
Do you want to read it for us, those 5 verses?
The Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, when thou takest the sum of the children of Israel according to their number, Then they shall give every man a ransom for his soul to the Lord, when thou numbers them, that there be no plague among them when thou numbers them. This they shall give every one that passeth among them that are numbered, half a shekel after the shekel of the sanctuary. The shekel is 20 gerahs, half a shekel for an offering to the Lord. Every one that pass among them that are numbered from 20 years old and upward shall give the offering of the Lord. The rich shall not give more, and the poor shall not give less than the half shekel when they give the offering of the Lord, to make atonement for your souls. And thou shalt take the atonement money from the children of Israel, and shall appoint it for the service of the tent of meeting, that it may be a memorial for the children of Israel before the Lord, to make atonement for your souls.
Okay, Ken, thank you. So it is, I always find it interesting when a Torah portion begins in the middle of a chapter, right? It's an intentional decision by the compilers to start with something. And without going too deeply into why we're starting here, the essential features of these first sentences, right? Why don't we at least just try to distill those? What are the takeaways that you have from these sentences if you had to summarize them super briefly?
Well, it's an odd word, ransom. It's about a mandatory giving, a mandatory donation.
So the whole ransom concept would need to be unpacked, and I agree, that is interesting. I don't know what it, I don't know what it means, right? At first blush. Yeah, Annette.
What I take away is that everybody is equal. Everybody gives the same amount. It doesn't matter whether they're rich or poor. Everybody pays, what is it, half a shekel?
Everybody's equal, and I appreciate
From a financial point of view.
Everybody's contribution is
It's
equal.
the same, yeah.
Okay, is the same. And also your reference to the half shekel, right? I appreciate that at the end.
I
Susanna.
just had a funny thought. How the hell did they earn money when they were wandering around? Where'd
Well,
they get money from?
Good question.
They took their money bags from Egypt.
right, exactly. Remember all those gifts at the end. And all of those sort of imponderables in the book of Exodus. How did they get all the things to build the Mishkan, blah, blah, blah. Oh,
Yeah.
from the Egyptians, it's reparations.
Well, they took it from the Egyptians and said
Yeah,
that somewhere when they
Yes.
when they were rushing out of Egypt, somehow they managed to stop to take money and gold and precious
Yeah.
stones to build the Mishkan. It's a little
Yes.
strange.
Good. Thank you for remembering the previous episodes. Yes, Susanna.
Well, the very first thing is the notion that they even take the idea of a census. It's not a given that you would count all the people, and that the people are to be counted based on their signing up. And it's a very advanced concept. There are many countries in the world where we still don't have an actual or accurate census today, to this very day. And to my mind, it's a primary responsibility of government is to count your numbers and know who's there.
Well, in fact, the Constitution mandates a census, excuse me. So yes, thank you for giving us that kind of worldwide view, right, of not to sort of blow by that concept, which is so essential. Claudia.
So I'm just looking through it, and it just repeats the notion over and over that no plague for expiation or your persons. It's 3 times it says something along that line, and so I'm just puzzled about why link the census with expiation of sins.
Yeah.
I don't get it, but it's just boom, boom, boom. So thereafter something here. And
Yeah.
oh, by the way, in the previous portion, there's the word horns, which is a different word than Karen. So I'm just wondering, why did they screw that up? But let's not go there. That's just in my flea brain.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go back after the session and take a look at that. Thank you for pointing out the atonement, because that's definitely an essential feature here. And Merle.
They had to count themselves in. That's how you get into it. And I was thinking, in Prague, I was in Prague and got involved with the Jewish community there for various reasons. And there's people register as Jews. There's a Jewish registry, not with the government, but with the Jewish community. And the people who count themselves in, it's a big deal, because what the government has done is some of the buildings that had been owned by Jews before the war couldn't be returned because there was nobody to be returned to. So what they've done is they've set up a fund, and the income from that fund goes to the Jewish community.
Huh.
And you have to register in to be part of it. Let's count myself in. And
And
that's
is-
sort of what the, by giving the half shekel, I'm saying, hey, I'm here, I'm a Jew. And nobody can buy more influence by putting more in. And I
Yeah.
somehow wish that was how the parties in this country worked.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for drawing that parallel. And Merle, the thing that you're talking about, the fund, is it funded by those registering, or is there a separate source of that fund?
I don't know if the funds that support the Jewish community come out of that, from income from the buildings that had originally, I guess people pay rent in the buildings.
I see. Okay, wonderful. So those are all great observations, and they may resonate as we come back. Let's go to the central episode I want to discuss with you today, which is at Exodus 32:7. And it is the end of Moshe's stay on Mount Sinai with God, when all of a sudden God tells Moshe that the people who've despaired in his absence for 40 days and 40 nights are in trouble, and he needs to get down. So let's go and read there. Susanna, we're going to go to 32, chapter 32, verse 7. And we're going to read through, I think it's verse 14.
The Lord spoke to Moses, "Hurry down, for your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, have acted basely. They have been quick to turn aside from the way that I enjoined upon them. They have made themselves a molten calf and bowed low to it and sacrificed to it, saying, 'This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt.' The Lord further said to Moses, 'I see that this is a stiff-necked people. Now let me be, that my anger may blaze forth against them, and that I may destroy them and make of you a great nation.' But Moses implored the Lord his God, saying, 'Let not your anger, O Lord, blaze forth against your people, whom you delivered from the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand. Let not the Egyptians say, it was with evil intent that he delivered them, only to kill them off in the mountains and annihilate them from the face of the earth. Turn from your blazing anger and renounce the plan to punish your people. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, how you swore to them by yourself and said to them, I will make you offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven, and I will give to your offspring this whole land of which I spoke to possess forever.' And the Lord renounced the punishment he had planned to bring upon his people."
Okay, thank you. Wow. All right. I'd like to focus on the first part, those first four sentences and I'd like to just go through it and see how many, I mean, clearly God is angry, but I'd like to drill down sentence by sentence and get the feeling for how the text communicates the anger. So let's start with verse 7. And you can either go English or go Hebrew on this one. There are kind of hints on both sides of the aisle, and the Hebrew may be a little bit even more direct. So observations on verse 7 is how they communicate anger.
Interesting that it's your people, not my people.
Ah, your people. That's so great, Joanne. Precisely. Just to, the renunciation implicit in that, your people, Amcha, beautiful. And we'll see anything else there. Yes, Claudia.
Ditto, who you brought out of the land of Egypt. I thought it's usually written that God brought us out of the land of Egypt. So
Yes.
so God is
Yeah.
taken himself out of any of this. Like when you're mad at a kid and you say your son rather than our son.
Right. Right. Yes, and it's sort of absurd for God to turn and say to Moses, who you brought. I mean, that's just total kind of washing hands of any connection. Yes, Merle.
I'm struck that if he really wanted to destroy them, he wouldn't have sent them down. Why did he need Moses to go down there? Moses could have got destroyed with them. So to me, what he's saying is, please help me. My anger is so intense that I may do something wrong. So, and in saying this, he's asking sort of to be restrained.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting, Merle, and it will resonate a little bit later in this section. So that I wholly agree with that observation. There's something implicit there. It doesn't, you have to dig, but it's there. Yeah. Annette.
Well, it's interesting because everything in the paragraph is you, except they have been quick to turn aside from the way that I enjoyed upon them. So he doesn't give it all up. He holds on to the fact that he's the whatever, the God who enjoined upon them.
And is that acknowledging God's role in that? You went to verse 8. I'm going to stick with verse 7 for just one more
sorry.
second.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. But you're reading verse 8 as somehow God acknowledging that God is part of this dyad.
Yes. And I'm
Okay.
sorry, I went to the next sentence.
No, that's all right. So your enthusiasm knows no bounds. That's the thing. So.
Well, that's not always true.
That's great. Okay. And then I'm sorry, Claudia.
Another way of looking at it is that if God had destroyed the people without showing Moshe what the whys, then I guess he could have said it without the witnessing, but there was something about God wanted Moshe to witness the why, not just know about it, but see it. He said, see what they've done. And righty. Oh, and then he said, I see. I wonder what this means. Stiff-necked people. There's the sentence. So there's the evidence and then the sentence. They're stiff-necked. I am very puzzled. I looked at the Hebrew and there are words I don't know.
Yeah.
Kosher or oref.
Yeah, we'll talk about stiff neck. The rabbis. So I think let me just mention one other thing in this sentence. Well, I see two more hands. So let's go ahead, Merle, and then Susanna.
I'm thinking of the other times that God destroyed massive people, and how you have Noah's flood where he doesn't give them any chance to repent. You have the Tower of Babel where he doesn't destroy them, he just disperses them and makes them impossible to deal together as a union. And here he's not giving them, he wants to destroy, and if he wants to destroy, he can. But I think he's sort of saying, and when he says, don't talk me down, he really wants to be talked down.
Yeah.
He's struggling with what to do with all the power that, I'm making God into a person, but he's struggling to do with how do I deal with my anger when I see something really atrocious?
Yeah. And I think the theme here that you've mentioned, Claudia's talked about a little bit. There's and then that there's kind of an opening here.
Yeah.
There's something, right? That's kind of unsettled. That's leaving a little bit of an opening. Susanna, go ahead, and then.
Well, just quickly going to because you mentioned to look at the Hebrew, that this phrase that's the imperative that's these two short syllables, lech red, like
Yes.
go down immediately. It's like, when you're really angry, just get out, like it's short staccato. And I don't
Yes.
know how much we have this phrase anywhere else in Torah, lech red, but it's very intense.
I'm so glad that you pointed that out. It's exactly right. And I don't know about that phrase, but I can tell you, excuse me, that kind of short imperative is rare. Yes, so that's wonderful. All right. One last thing, Vayidaber, right? There's the rabbis always sort of focus on Vayidaber versus Vayomer, and Vayidaber always has a little bit more of a harsh tone to it. So one more little piece of that. Then we go to verse 8. Well, Vayishtachavulo, they bowed down to it. Vayizbechulo, Vayomer Elo. It's sort of the bill of particulars also comes down. Boom, boom, boom. So what's the sense that you have of God's reaction when the kind of multiple sort of charges are laid out? Boom, 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 like that. Yes, Annette.
Well, there's God time and there's human time.
Hmm.
God thinks they're quick to turn aside, but part of the reason it happened is because humans felt they'd been waiting forever and nothing was happening.
Interesting. Right. And so you're saying that's the reaction to the 40 days, 40 nights, right? It sort of stretches in the mindset of these people into this incredibly
Right. I mean, they were desperate. They'd been waiting forever. They felt that God had forsaken them and Moses had disappeared, and they were literally wandering in a different kind of way.
Yeah.
In the desert, and they needed a replacement for God, and Aaron didn't know what to do because everything was getting out of control. So he helped them build this calf to replace, to give them some sense of unity and purpose and something to worship. And God's like, boy, they were quick to turn aside from me.
Yeah.
What's wrong with these people?
Well, there's, you phrase it as God's time, but also, I mean, there is to a certain extent objective time. I mean, after the miracles that they've witnessed, right, 40 days later, I mean, do you judge them or do you accept that? I mean, do you?
I'm going to disagree with you about that. I had an uncle who was a musician, and he always told me that so he was very conscious of time, because in music you have to be very precise about time. And he always told me that humans make ways to mark time, but time is a artificial construct that we establish.
Well, time, 3/4 or 4/4 is definitely, a musician tell you, a construct. But
so are years, so are weeks, so are months, so are
yeah. Well, but it's interesting, I'm going back to I don't know, has anyone ever read Uses of Enchantment by Bruno Bettelheim? It's about fairy tales and how they kind of speak to the psyche of children. And he talks about the Aladdin and lamp story. And Aladdin, the genie is caught in the lamp for however long it is, hundreds of years. And when he comes out, the genie's first response is to be angry. And Bettelheim says this immediately speaks to the mind of the 4-year-old who's angry at their parents when they go out to dinner. And so they can, hook into this feeling of anger over abandonment. So the Israelites had 40 days and 40 nights to sort of stoke up their fear. And so maybe that's to be understood. All right, yes, go ahead, Claudia.
I was just checking the order. The expiation came before the sin, and if they had flipped the order of it, I'm not sure. Then the expiation, using the money for the census, they could have done a census without money, but doing that, then each person was doing his own not her, but own personal expiation for the sin of the golden calf. But it's not that way. So I'm still like, okay.
Well, Claudia, you are pointing to kind of an excellent question that sits at the heart of this, which is the question of chronology. And if in fact the golden calf episode precedes the beginning of Ki Tisa in true chronological time, then it would make sense that this was expiation for the golden calf. And some commentators, in fact, say the chronology is mixed up. The golden calf came before, and it is expiation. So you are exactly on point in thinking about what it would look like if that were the order. Thank you. Joanne, were you trying to say something?
Just an absolute side comment was I would not use Bruno Bettelheim as proof or as example of anything. He was a fraud and really, I won't go into it, but absolutely do not find some other reference. You may be right, but please find another reference.
Oh, wow. I stand corrected. The jury will disregard all references to Bruno Bettelheim. And I'm going to go research that. As much as I love that story, it may be off limits now. Thank you for that warning, Joanne. Okay, so we are going to, I just want to though ask one thing. If you were to really dig into the sort of the tone feeling of God's anger, right? And this is going back to the comments that were made at the beginning of really trying to get to the essence of what's behind the anger and do some true listening. What exactly is God angry about? Can we tell so far? Yeah,
Well,
Susanna.
I mean, most immediately that he's being replaced. And not and the invisible. I mean, there's so much about Moses not being able to see God. And of course, the people, not only are they impatient about and feeling abandoned and all of this, which very much is what we understand, but the more concrete issue is that they want to see, they want something visible, tangible, and they have created this, effectively the idol. And the whole, going back to Abraham, the worst thing that one can do as a Jew, right, is to bow down to an idol. And so when he's saying they've made themselves a calf and bowed low to it,
Yeah.
I mean, that's immediately for any, and we've just had Purim. So if you want to talk about the holiday time,
Yeah.
where the bowing down to anybody other than the one and only God is absolutely, what is going to destroy you. We have this there. So that's the first huge shock. But it's also interesting, going back to what whoever talked about this earlier, that this issue of turning aside from the way, like that is even more important, what they've done, which is meaning like not following the mitzvot in effect, or not following the right path. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. That's too certain. And again, focusing on the precise nature of God's reaction, right? This sense of, you're replacing me, right? And you're not following my ways. Go ahead, Annette, you've had your hand raised.
He's not just been replaced, he's been replaced by a lowly animal. I mean, this is not any kind of magnificent structure or statue or whatever. I mean, it's a calf.
Right.
It's really, I mean, they couldn't come up with something better to replace me?
Yeah.
Really?
I mean, talk about going to the opposite end of the spectrum, right? From the kind of invisible, right, monotheistic,
right, mysterious, with this Mishkan, this beautiful Mishkan that was built with the jewels and the exact measurements, and I'm a cloud above it. Now we got this calf. I mean, think about it.
Well, and the thing that
yuck.
Exactly. And the thing I want to sort of take off on there is, not to anthropomorphize, but my intent with this question is to anthropomorphize. Isn't the nature of this a feeling of, being spurned by your lover, right? Spurned by your partner. And God is hurt, indignant. It's what's behind your description of this and that. It's like, of all people, you jilted me for that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, really,
it's
disgusting.
So it's super personal.
What did I do? How could you have jilted me for?
Yeah.
Well, your kids, it's your kids.
Richard, this is Joanne. I don't know where my raise hand thing is on this particular computer that I'm on, which is why I'm interrupting. I apologize for that.
No.
So,
Go ahead. Well, Ken was just going to say something and then Joanne will be up
Yeah.
next. How about that?
It's burned by your kids, by God's kids,
Hmm.
by all of them, or by so many of them.
Oh, so there's a parent-child dimension to it as well.
Than
Yeah.
more than a spouse. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you for giving that sort of shading to it. Joanne.
yeah, this is maybe out of left field, but I just had a whole different thought about God's anger, so-called, and all of that. And I think it's because, but we just went through Purim, and I realized that this is completely non-chronological, but we just we just celebrated Purim, and it seems to me that one of the lessons of Purim, which may be one of what's going on here also, although I don't know, is that in Purim, it's up to a human being to try to solve the situation. And that all this so-called anger of God and all of that may be kind of forcing Moses to recognize that human beings have responsibility and that that it can't all be God does this and God does that. It's a sort of a prefiguring of humanity taking responsibility for its actions and its leadership.
Huh. That's so interesting to phrase it that way, Joanne. And I can imagine the saying, God thinking, I've carried these people on my back. I mean, again, not to anthropomorphize too much. Enough is enough. They need to take some ownership.
How would you put it in such negative terms, but in positive terms, that this is what we all do. At some point, we don't want our children still to be completely dependent on us, but that we train them to be able to be independent and make their own decisions.
Right. All right. Thank you. I want to very briefly answer Claudia's cachet oref, stiff-necked. There is one rabbinic description of the stiff neck is you turn your back, and to be stiff-necked is also to be renouncing. And also you turn your back, you're not listening anymore. And that ties into the stubbornness. So I've heard that kind of poetic description. I want to take us to the sentence right after, let's see, where is this? It says, Hanichali, now let me be, that my anger may blaze forth against them, that I may destroy them. And then it ends with, Esel otcha lagoy gadol, I will make of you a great nation. What is that? Those words are familiar. Where are they from? Yes, Claudia.
Well, Abraham.
These are the exact words that God said to Abraham in Lech Lecha. What? So why are those words here? What is God saying? Goy gadol. I will make of you a great nation. Let me destroy those people. What is that?
Starting all over again.
Yes, starting all over. The grand experiment with Abraham and his line is done. I'm done with these people. I'm taking my toys and going home, and we're going to start with you. And Moshe, to his credit, does not rise to that, right? I mean, Moshe is about the people. Maybe in the hands of another leader, I'll start all over with you and you can be the great one. The answer may be, where do I sign? But Moshe does not do that. But it's an astounding, I mean, if you want any proof of how almost, I don't know what, out of control is the only way I could phrase it. And Merle, you mentioned, earlier moments of destruction, right? Noach. There's the same kind of, and interestingly, okay, so this is the end of God's, I don't know, I hesitate to use the word rant, but for 4 sentences it goes on. Moshe doesn't say anything, which itself is saying something, because in Torah narrative, talking about God's time, people, Israel's time, this is a long time for one speaker to go forward and expound. And at the end, the word is at the end of God's last sentence, Hanichali. Hanichali. And so this is also kind of going back to Noach, And Hanich Ali says, let me be. Rashi says that by saying, let me be, so I can destroy them, God was actually inviting. And so this is
Yeah.
going back to what our commentators here were saying at the beginning, that there's a little bit of an invitation to Moshe to step in. Hanich Ali could mean leave me alone, and Hanich Ali could also mean comfort me. So was there an invitation to Moshe to speak? But be that as it may, Moshe starts to speak. And so it says, Moses implored God, let your anger not blaze forth, whom you delivered. So taking a look at that sentence, and take a look at how the people are referenced. When God
Your
said
people.
in the first to Moshe, your people, Moshe comes back and says, no, 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 your people, who you took out of the land of Egypt. So the first thing is, to the extent that people were saying you have to be in a listening mode, Moshe was very clearly listening, because he now starts to rebut some of what God is saying point by point. And so that's the first one. It's your people, and you're the one who took them out of Egypt, if I may be so bold as to remind you. And then next phrase, Lama Yomru Mitzrayim. Let not the Egyptians say that it was with evil intent. And so let's talk about this argument. And I will say Lama. There's Lama is a Hebrew word for why, and there are two words in Hebrew for why, Lama and Madua. Madua is sort of why is the sky blue, right? It's looking backwards and trying to sort of explain either actions, phenomenon. Lama is lema, for what purpose? Like, why would you do that? And that is the sense of this sentence. And so, Claudia, I see your hand. I will call on you in 1 second, and maybe you're raising your hand to speak to this. What's the essence of this argument? Why would you do this? And the Egyptians would say, what's the point of this? Claudia, if you're answering that question, go ahead. Otherwise, we'll get an answer. And
Yes, pretty much.
go ahead.
But I'm looking at all three of them. Because it gets back to your original question. What are the strategies to talk somebody down? So if the upregulated state in neurobiology it's about survival, which is black or white. Either the saber-toothed tiger is after you for lunch or it's not. Then what? But if your affect level is in safety, it's not about survival, it's about connection. Moses is reconnecting God. Your people you delivered, and not me. And the second one, he goes away from that to something else that might deter somebody, consequences of your action. But that's still pulling for calming, because if a saber-toothed tiger is after you, you're not thinking about what's going to happen next, you're thinking about the here and now. So in the future, the Egyptians will say bad stuff about you. So calm down, but you have to be calmer to think about the future. And then the last one, he goes back to connection. Remember your servants, oh, by the way, who you swore, all connection. So he's pulling for it's called the zone of tolerance in neurobiology. And it works. But I gotta say, it's also, hilarious might not be the best word, but pretty soon, Moshe is the one who goes into a blazing rant, and there's nobody there to talk him down. He just goes, wappo,
If we have time, we'll go there. So first of all, thank you. Perfectly laying out the kind of anger management playbook. And I don't know when you're opening your consultancy to, divine being anger management, but the phone will be ringing off the hook. Very good. Thank you. Susanna.
So just quickly, I think that the one sort of addition to that very, very helpful outline by Claudia is that maybe this technique or the talking down in this case goes to sort of God's very existence, and identity. And when somebody has sort of gone out of control with rage, one way of talking them down, which I don't think we really mentioned exactly, is to say, this isn't who you are. You are, and there's a lot of flattery here. You're the God that did this and this and this. Is this really how you want to be remembered? And this is something we're dealing with a lot in the United States right now. This very this is not this is not Americans, or let's go to there are many other countries you could say this about. This is not who we are, and it's maybe hard to hear in the moment because it's really an existential argument, and nothing. But anyway.
Good. Yeah, you really can hear echoes of the politicians who are trying to talk us down and say this is not who America is, right? So yeah, thank you. Annette.
I think this is a brilliant speech. First of all, Moses is not supposed to be a speaker. And here he is making this brilliant speech. And I also think for the people who wrote it, this is not only a message to God in the story, this is a message to those of us who are reading it. This summarizes quite succinctly who we are as a people and everything that came before. And we need to remember that. It's kind of, this is what God promised us. And maybe I'm reading too much into it. We have a covenant to keep. These people went astray, and we shouldn't go astray because this is the promise God made to us, and we need to keep our end of the bargain.
Right.
And I think of that when I read it.
I like that. So it's words for the ages.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you.
It's like, tell us about what happened before in 25 words or less.
Right.
Which is
yeah,
flippant. I don't mean for it to be flippant, but when I read it, I think about everything that came before in the Torah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. Ken.
Yeah, it is. It is remarkably articulate, and it definitely, it seems to me, I mean, Moses is being the adult in the room here. I mean, Moses is correcting God and talking back to God and being wise, and it's like, and it's striking to me how petulant God is in this chapter. And we've talked a lot about anthropomorphizing, but I mean, God is seemingly pretty childish here in this weird way.
Well, so I want to, I hear you, and I think it is a natural reaction. And one of the things that is puzzling as to why God's reaction is so intense, and why should it matter to God what the Egyptians think? Why is that such an effective argument? And we're going to go back to that. I just think that one way of reading this is to walk away from it and saying, how childish and petulant, oh, this is really, showing it. But is there some legitimacy behind it? And the rabbis do have some comment on that I want to bring back. I'm going to move us along. I see two hands raised. If we can make the points briefly, and then we'll go ahead. Merle.
I'm thinking how great Moses is, because when God had commanded Abraham to sacrifice his child, Abraham just goes ahead and doesn't say, hey, you promised to make a great nation out of me, you did this and that. He follows. And Moses has the strength and the courage and the integrity to argue with God.
Yep. So that's great. Very, very true that it's, Abraham did a little bit of arguing with God over Sodom and
Gomorrah,
but this is another level, and to certainly stand in the face of an angry God who's gone through those 4 sentences, took some guts. Yes, Annette.
I'm thinking that in the time, I could be off base, but the thing with the Egyptians is important because in the time there were still other gods people were worshiping, and it was important to put forth the God of the Israelis because it wasn't clear in the times which gods were gonna win out over the people. So it was important to put forth the Israeli God.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I think in the modern day, we need to say the Israelite God, because some of the people talking about the Israeli God.
Oh, yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
the Israelite
Yeah.
God, sorry, yes, good point, excellent point.
Yeah,
But
no problem.
that's why, but I could be wrong because I don't know my history that well.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So we know from this session, we're not going to talk about Bettelheim, and we're not going to talk about the Israeli God. So I'm keeping notes on, okay, I'm joking. Okay, one other thing. So obviously the reference to Abraham, God brought it up, and Moshe is like constantly pivoting God on these things. So it's like, you want to bring up Abraham. Abraham's the one you made the promise to. Abraham's the one that you spent all the time obsessively testing, and you can't all of a sudden kind of just throw it all out again. And then in 14, Vayinachem Adonai al hara'ah asher diber la'asot le'amo. And God, so the JPS translation is renounced, but let's look at that word Vayinachem. Susanna, you're shaking your head. Well, I mean, what do we think about Vayinachem?
Yeah, because it shows mercy. He repented in effect from.
He repented. Vayinachem, we're going to go back to Vayinachem appears in the story of Noach, and there's a lot of Noach in here, which we're going to unpack in a second. The time in the Noach story where Vayinachem was used is God regretted making humankind and then decided to destroy humankind in the flood, except for Noah. That was the Vayinachem back there. And so what's the Vayinachem here? What could the regret be? Why would God be regretting in verse 14?
He's regretting his anger.
Yeah, regretting his anger. God realizing like, oh, was I actually ready to tear it up again? And maybe there's some regret there that Moshe kind of allows God to realize. Yes, Claudia.
I just looked at the word for punishment, but it's ra'ah, which
Yes.
usually can mean bad or evil or misdeed. Is there another word? So I'm asking people who know more Hebrew. Is there another word for punishment in Hebrew such that then there would be meaning, or is it, a different meaning, a shade of meaning for ra'ah, like you just unpacked for vayinatem, or is this a word that has many meanings? So depending on context.
Yeah, I think ra'ah is bad. Ra'ah is bad. It's like almost ra'ah, right?
Could there be a double entendre here where it could be God regretted the bad that he said? Because it's hara'ah asher diber. It's not necessarily the punishment on the people, but maybe he regretted the words that he said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could that be interpreted that way?
I think
Grammatically?
because it says asher diber la'asot, that God said
that they did.
God was going to do, but it's still words. I regret what I said I was going to do. So it is about the regretting the words, right? Well, obviously God did not go ahead and
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
it just recalls a
That
lashon
function.
hara, like we have this like
Yeah.
evil speech almost,
Yeah.
as well as
Exactly,
evil
yes.
that they did.
That was what I was
Right.
thinking about.
And by the way, the reference to stiff-necked people is a labeling. It is, I certainly sure you've all learned over time that labeling somebody is like the absolute worst thing, and sort of denying their humanity, their story. Yeah, I mean, I certainly times that I've used labeling language, I have regretted. So
The translation I have is reconsidered, which is much lighter than regretted.
Yeah, that's true. I agree with you that it doesn't have the kind of, it's not as emotionally laden. It's a little more in the head than the heart.
Mhm.
in a sense too. So let me see if I can find this. I'm hoping I can find this quickly.
Just while you're looking, I mean, the Nachamu Yinachem, it also has a translation as comfort too. It's like the mercy, the heart is a big part of it. It's the same word, right? Nachamu, like Nachamu,
Nachamu and
Nachamu,
Noach
comfort
is
you, my people.
Yeah.
You know, in the Babylonian exile. So it's a very rich word. It's not none of these translations.
Absolutely. Thank you. This is in the realm of echoes of Noach. So the first thing here is verse 7, and this is the beginning of God's speech. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe, lech, raid, ki shichet amcha. Shichet, I have highlighted because when you go back down to Bereshit, chapter 6, Batishachet haaretz lefnei ha'Elohim. And so this was the corrupt ways immediately preceding the Noah story that leads God to decide to destroy. Next, Vayinachem Adonai, as I mentioned before, God regretted making people. So we've got the Vayinachem word, Vayinachem Adonai ki asa et adam ba'aretz. So this another from the Noah story, Vayinachem. Then Ela told of Noach. Noach's very name, right, has the concept of comfort. And Noach was the source of comfort, at least for that generation. Then the Zachor LaAvraham from our current portion. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you made these promises. And at the end of the Noah story, there's the rainbow in the sky. Zacharti et briti. I remember my covenant, and I will never destroy mankind again, humankind. And then the 40 days for 40 nights, right? That Moses spends up on the mountain. Well, that's how long it rained.
Rained for 40 days.
And then finally, which is just totally wild, in Shmot chapter 2, verse 3, the basket that Moses is described as being in is a teva, which is the exact word for the ark. Make yourself an ark. So there are many parallels drawn between this passage and the story of Moshe, and it's summarized in a Devarim Rabbah, midrash from Devarim. Let me see if I can get this here. I think I have to expand my screen. This is sort of a lovely one here. Noach said to Moshe, I am greater than you, for I was saved from the generation of the flood. And Moshe said to him, I am more exalted than you. You saved yourself and were unable to save your generation. But I saved myself, and I saved the generation who were liable for destruction because of the calf. And how do we know this? As it was said, and it goes to our Shmot 32:14, and God repented of the evil that God had said to do to God's people. So Noach is like all over this in subtle ways that you might not have picked up. And Rabbi David Foreman has written extensively on this and in a really kind of a beautiful way. Now, I want to go to this issue of God's sensitivity. And why is God so sensitive? And why is it stated in such personal terms? Yes, Merle, go ahead.
I'm coming also thinking forward the story of Jonah, which, if God was also going to destroy, but he sent Jonah, the role Jonah plays, and there Jonah gets angry.
Right.
You made me uplift my life, and what for? Because I didn't have to come.
Yeah. Jonah's playing the reverse role.
Yeah. You have the different ways.
The empathy infuser. Yeah, he's not. Okay. Were you signaling there, Claudia, or were you just showing the oppositeness of it?
No, just the progression from Noach, where nobody tries to talk God out of anything. And but Abraham, who does talk God out of Sodom and Gomorrah destruction, but here where Abraham engages and God does back off. So God is morphing.
Right.
Yeah. And then Jonah, which is lovely, where I don't remember the Hebrew, but God says, really, you want me to destroy this whole city that has, is there where it says, there's many children, there's many animals, or is that Abraham? I'm not sure. Anyway,
Right.
but God is, the concept of God is morphing, which is always annoys me when Christians say, oh, we have the God of love and you have the God of, anger. It's like,
Yeah.
excuse me, have you read what's going on?
Yeah,
Um,
makes you want to carry around literature. Let me, let's see, I guess I'm going to go to one thing and then try to close up with a little bit of this theme of why God is so angry and what does that mean? But I guess one question I wanted to ask, and I think, Claudia, did you talk about Moses coming down the mountain and then Moses displays his anger? And I'm just wondering, I mean, those two incidents are juxtaposed. I have actually, in all honesty, I've not done a lot of preparation on that piece because I didn't think we go that far, but we've got a few minutes. And I'm just wondering how people feel about Moshe, having spent this time in the anger management seminar, walks out and then blows up. So Claudia, I see your hand is raised.
Oh, well, it's just interesting. We have two instances of Moshe blowing up. One was when he hit the rock, and wasn't it that for that he was never allowed into the promised land because but God never calls him out for this, even though God was angry and thought better. But God never says, I just demoed something for you. You didn't do it. So therefore, I'm going to get you for that one. Moshe gets a pass for it. From God, at least.
Yeah. And so I think there is some rabbinic commentary on that I'll throw out there. And there is a third incident of anger when Moses strikes the Egyptian, right? Using the same vayach, right? And so Moses definitely has some anger issues, and there's irony to. And Merle, I know you've spoken about Moshe. Moshe's anger. I'm sure you're finding it a little ironic that Moshe is in this position. Go ahead. I see your hand raised. Merle?
Yeah, I'm thinking of the difference in the two sets of tablets. The first set was actually written in God's hand. The second set is Moses. You'd think that something that was originally crafted, I don't know the word to say, by God himself, maybe the writers of this, you can't have something, where are you going to find something that's actually crafted by God? Maybe it's an explanation somehow of how this only got into be a human hand.
I'm sorry, can you give me that again? So the transition.
What I'm saying is,
Yeah.
Whoever wrote the Torah,
Yeah.
the magnificence of having something that was actually from God's hand itself.
Yeah.
They didn't have it, right?
Right.
So they had to explain why they didn't have it.
Got it. So this was their way to put it in.
Yeah.
Interesting. These the insertion of a true origin story that you could believe, maybe. Yeah.
Right.
Interesting.
I think this is yet another step in the progression of not turning to God for an answer to everything and to help them through everything, but to take responsibility as human beings. And you may have to go through, various what look like unnecessary emotions like anger, although maybe that is necessary. But I do see this as another progression towards human beings being responsible for and being aware of the world that they live in. And I think that's one of the reasons for the mention of Egypt earlier, which you asked about. We have to be aware that we are living in the real world.
Yeah.
And that what we do provokes actions in the real world.
Interesting. Okay. I certainly see that as a message one could draw. I want to mention one thing, that there's a rabbinic strain that talks about Moshe's anger, and I think it's going to Claudia, was it your point that you were making, that God gives Moshe a pass here for smashing the tablets? And the rabbinic, at one point later, and I can't find the verse, God, take a look at 34, chapter 1. And this is where God says to Moshe, go grind another set of tablets, go carve another set of tablets. And I will inscribe on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you shattered. Asher Shibarta. Now, this is not, is God upbraiding Moshe with this? And there's a section from the Talmud that says, God wouldn't do that. God would not shame Moshe that way. And in fact, what God was saying is, you actually did an honorable thing. And the strain of commentary is that Moshe interceded to not deliver the Torah in the face of the Israelites' renunciation of God. And by smashing the tablets, he avoided that shame upon Israel, allowed them the time to repent and then be able to receive the tablets. And so those rabbis view what Moshe did as a heroic act, and put the angry smashing in the context of a kind of a more elevated emotion. I think that's maybe, the Moshe's PR machine was working on that. I don't know, but that's certainly one interpretation. Susanna, are you?
No, I was just thinking as you were talking about this, that in fact there's, and Claudia's probably much more of an expert on this, but it appears to me that there's almost a transference of anger that has occurred. Like Moses was in the position of talking God down, and it was a very dramatic thing. But of course, Moshe is the protege, follower, worshiper of God. And so after doing all that, a lot of times, you could think about this in our daily interactions, when you talk someone down and then you think later, it's like, whoa, maybe they were right to be that angry. Maybe I have a responsibility to absorb some of that anger and maybe not do that thing, but I'm going to embody some of that same emotion, because I have a responsibility, and I learned from this person, and I'm not just, saying it's all wrong.
Yeah.
And this is a very interesting kind of cogitation and absorption of anger and transmission of anger that happens. I think it's very human. Maybe it's very godly. I don't know.
I appreciate you grounding that in emotional truth. And I want to go back to Claudia's initial observation from the neuroscience, that the response to anger is a provocation of difficult negative emotions or even angry emotions in the hearer. And it's there's almost like a little bit of abuse begets abuse. And did Moshe walk away from this encounter having to kind of absorb all of this, and he needed to ground it, if you will, almost like an electrical charge, you wonder. So I want to bring us full circle to this whole notion of God's anger in the face of the betrayal. And is there a way to look at that as beyond the kind of human emotion of being a spurned partner? And Nechama Leibovitz, who I mentioned at the beginning of this, talks about the heart of this issue, comes out of another biblical verse that she interprets, but it's basically God is invested in us, that we are God's partner to sort of bring godliness into the world. And it's that need for us that is behind God's emotional response, pain at the Israelites turning away, because this was an experiment long in the making, 400 years in the making, right? To go from the promise to Abraham to the redemption of the Israelites to the revelation. And now all of a sudden, this is going to disappear. And I think in that reading, that is the pain that God is feeling. And it gives maybe a little bit of resonance to Moshe's response of, this is who you've partnered with, right? All the way back to Abraham, and you got to stick with it. And to bring us full circle, we started with a parsha that almost artificially broke at the half shekel, right? And the whole census. And what's that doing there? And so one way to look at the half shekel is that the people who are enumerated, each of them stepping up, each of them contributing, each of them only owns half. And the question is, who's the other half shekel? And the Slonim Rebbe talks about the other half shekel is the Klal Yisrael, the people of Israel, but also the other half shekel is God. And I think it really speaks to the partnership that is at the heart of this parsha, of potential brokenness, but potential unity. And so for me, this is the model of the Jewish God, that it is a partnership with God. As much as we seek the comfort of God, God seeks the comfort of us. And God is looking to us to be the instrument of chesed and godly attributes in the world. So I think the question is, for us to have the fortitude, the focus to keep up our end of the bargain, to be a source of comfort and not of regret. So Shabbat Shalom.
Wow. That was great.
Beautiful. Shabbat shalom.
Thank you.
Oh, that was very beautiful, Rich. Thank you.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you very much.
So wonderful to study together. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Be well.
Bye. Thanks, Rich.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.